Show them from this side of the room if you can. Come in. Welcome. Yes, there's lots of seats available on this side of the room as well. If you need a chair, you can bring one in from the other shrine room if you need. You're welcome. Welcome. Yeah, come on in. You can just take the chair there. That's fine. Yeah. Yeah. Welcome. Do make yourself comfortable. There's some seats over there. Some more chairs here. At the back. Okay, good. So is that two more? Okay, that's fine. 5 more. It's gone up. Popular, he talks popular. Come on in, come on in. There's some more seats. Just put your hand up if there's a cushion next to your cushion. You got lots to choose from there. Welcome. Come on in. Need a clock as well. Good, yeah, so very warm welcome to Paramabandhu's talk. I'll say a bit more about Paramabandhu in a minute. My name's Diane Arthur, by the way. I've been co-leading Sangha Day with Surya Gupta here, and we've had a really wonderful day so far. Welcome, Liam, come on in. Liam's going to become a mitra later, so... So, there's Amadiodan as well. Wow. Hey, welcome. Welcome, yeah. Great. So yes, it's been a really lovely day, and what we've been talking about is the beneficial influence of Sangha and the atmosphere of Sangha and how that helps with our own practice, and then also how we can contribute to that ourselves. And I feel like we've really been doing that today, and the atmosphere is very palpable of friendliness and joint spiritual practice. So really been enjoying the day. It's been wonderful and great to see you here for the next session. So just to say a bit more about what's happening after this session first. So afterwards we've got dinner. Dinner is served in the Mandala Cafe. The Mandala Cafe, for those who don't know, is the restaurant next door. It's our very brand new venture, our brand new business venture that we've been raising money for in the Sangha over all the past year, and we've managed to hit our target, didn't we? We've hit our target, fundraising target. So we managed to build it, so it was fantastic. So and I really recommend going there if you haven't been there already. Sachi Manas is on the team there. I really recommend going just to try out the menu, the atmosphere in the week. But tonight we've got a dinner there as well, so that's by donation, and so you're just welcome to go have some food in there. And that'll be, and that's from about 5:45 tonight, so I really recommend that. Yes. Then after that, we'll have the Mitra ceremonies in here, back at 7 o'clock. So that's a chance to just, in a way, see the Sangha grow. So it's people that are saying they want to get more involved in the Sangha, and they think of themselves as Buddhists and they want to get more involved, and they have been getting more involved, and they are going to get more involved. So that's usually very moving. So do stick around for that if you can. Good. So now moving on to Paramabandhu. So Paramabandhu, here he is. He's going to be giving his talk on a garden in the wilderness. That's the title, and it's a very appropriate title for Paramabandhu. For those of you that don't know, Paramabandhu, well, he's a keen gardener. His name actually means noble friend, and I think you could say noble friend to plants is included in that. He's very keen gardener. He's all the gardens at the LBC are tended by Paramabandhu, grown by Paramabandhu. In fact, even the planters outside, he called the council and asked them if he could do them as well, didn't you? And they said yes. So actually, he spread out his garden into the urban jungle, so outside as well. And sometimes you see these big boxes come to the LBC, don't you? This has just like this live on the outside of it with little holes in, and I'm always a bit worried about what's inside. But I think they are plants, so that's okay. So he's a very keen gardener. He likes to, he has a lot of patience, I think, for that, because plants take a long time to grow, don't they? But he has a lot of patience, and he grows beautiful gardens. But not only does he grow plants, of course, what he really likes to grow is people. And I'm lucky to be one of his. Paramabandhu ordained me, so I'm one of his preceptees. So he's my preceptor. And actually, there's a few of us in the room that were ordained by Paramabandhu, because Paramabandhu is a very, very good teacher and a good guide. He's very, very caring and a very good listener. He used to be a psychiatrist, actually, even, and I think it's not just because he was a psychiatrist that he's a good listener. I think he's naturally a very caring and good listener, and a person that I think is very equanimous as well. So not much really riles Paramabandhu. So whatever's happening outside, yesterday they dug up the whole street outside the Buddhist centre. Is very, very noisy, and Paramabandhu, I think, just took it in his stride, slept through the night, and I'm not surprised about that. That's Paramabandhu in a nutshell. Very, very equanimous. He can deal with anything, and I think that's because not only does he care about people, but he cares about his own mind. He's a very dedicated practitioner. It's amazing, actually. He's kept his routine going all through these years. So he gets up 6:30 every day, most days, don't you? I think on Sundays it's 7, isn't it? No, it's still 6:30 every day, and does his meditation practice faithfully, and just enjoys it. And you can really see the benefits of that, and that's actually made him an even better listener, better practitioner, better friend that I've appreciated. And just the last thing I'll say, he's not only a friend to me and us, he's also actually the president of 5 other centres in the world. So he's a friend to them as well. 5, that's a lot. And one of them's in Mexico. I think it's because he likes going to Mexico. But he also obviously he cares a lot about the whole movement in the world in general, and a lot of people look up to him, and I do very much. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say. So Paramabandhu.
Great, thank you very much, Dianata. Actually, I do have a 5-minute lie-in on Sunday mornings. Okay, so I'd like to start with the opening lines of the Dhammapada. The Dhammapada is an important scripture in Buddhism, and at the very beginning of it, it starts with these lines. It goes, experiences are preceded by mind, led by mind, and produced by mind. So what it's saying is that our experience, what we experience, what happens to us, in a way, is shaped by our mind. Our mind shapes how we experience life, how we experience ourselves, how we experience our world. There's a slightly different translation which goes like this. What we are today comes from our thoughts of yesterday, and our present thoughts build our life of tomorrow. Our life is the creation of our mind. So, although it says thoughts in this translation, we can include thoughts, emotions, and so on. But again, what is happening in our mind will shape what happens to us in the future. And as it says, our life is the creation of our mind. So, we could say that our world is created by our mind. So, how does that work? How does our mind do that? Well, the verses continue, so I'll read the first two verses in full. Experiences are preceded by mind, led by mind, and produced by mind. If one speaks or acts with an impure mind, suffering follows, even as the cartwheel follows the hoof of the ox drawing the cart. Experiences are preceded by mind, led by mind, and produced by mind. If one speaks or acts with a pure mind, happiness follows like a shadow that never departs. So when it says an impure mind is a mind that's dominated by hatred or ill will, by trying to grasp hold of things, by lack of clarity. And what it says with an impure mind is that suffering inevitably follows, just as when you have an ox with a cart behind, just as the ox moves along, the cart follows behind because they're joined together. Whereas a pure mind is a mind that's full of love, of clarity, of wisdom. And it says in this, the analogy is that happiness follows like a shadow. So just as when the sun is out, there'll inevitably be a shadow. So when we act out of these mind states, happiness will come to us. So, in a way, when I was thinking about this, it reminded me of, you may have heard this story. There's a story of a family that are going to visit a town they've never been to before. So they're driving along, and in the drive into this town, and there's a guy kind of sitting at the crossroads, and they're curious about what sort of town this is that they're coming to. So they wind down the window. It's an old-fashioned car. They wind down the window and lean out and say, "So, what kind of town is it? What are the people like here?" And so the guy says to them, "Well, what were the people like in the last town you visited?" And they said, "Oh, they were really awful. They were terrible. They were so unpleasant and complaining and miserable." And the guy responds, "Yeah, they're just like that here. It's really not very nice. It's I wouldn't stay here if I were you," sort of thing. So they drive off and don't stay. And then another family turns up in another car. It's also an old-fashioned car, so the window comes down, and ask the same question about this town. And the guy again asks them, "Well, what was the town like where you've just come from?" And they said, "Oh, it's great. People were so friendly, so helpful." And the guy goes, "Yeah, people are like that here. They're really friendly. They're really helpful. You'll really like it here. It's really worth staying here." So, I hope you get the idea. What I was thinking of is just how we, that's just a little example of how we create a world depending on what kind of mindset we hold. Again, I was thinking of another little analogy. So I used to work on the other side of the river down in South London for a number of years. And at a certain point, I set myself a little mindfulness practice, and my mindfulness practice was to arrive at work in a better mental state than I left. Okay? So, and actually that's a very doable thing. With a bit of effort, it's very doable to do that. You just really pay attention to your mind, and you can arrive at work in a quite a good mental state, which helps. when one arrives at work. But I found it interesting talking to my colleagues, some of my colleagues said that, people who drive on the roads in London, they're so bad. They're really, really, terrible. And they would sort of, complain to me about them. Now, it's true that, I've had a few accidents in my time, not due to always to my own fault, where, I have been, knocked over when cycling. But overall, my experience of cycling around London is actually it's quite a safe place to cycle. That I generally find car drivers are pretty respectful, but not so for some of my colleagues. And again, I think just a little example of the sort of mind state that you bring to your experience is going to shape the sort of world that you experience. It was like I lived, when in that sort of example, it's like I was in a different world from the world that some of my fellow cyclists were living in at that time. So the question is, what sort of world are we trying to create as Buddhists? And specifically in this tradition, in Triratna, what sort of world are we trying to create? So this is really what I want to look at in this talk. So back in 1973, Bhante, that's Sangharakshita, who's the founder of our tradition, he went off to Cornwall for a few months to have a sabbatical. So it was very new order and movement at that time in 1973, 50 years ago. We didn't have the London Buddhist Centre here, didn't exist at that time. There was a centre called Pundarika in North London, which was leased from Camden Council in a disused factory. So things were just very, very new. The order had started, the movement started in 1967, the order in 1968. So the order had just been going at that time for 5 years. So Bhante went off to Cornwall, but he left as a kind of legacy a poem. He left the order at that time, it's before my time, a poem. So this is the poem. It's called 4 Gifts. I come to you with 4 gifts. The first gift is a lotus flower. Do you understand? My second gift is a golden net. Can you recognize it? My third gift is a shepherd's round dance. Do your feet know how to dance? My fourth gift is a garden planted in the wilderness. Could you work there? I come to you with 4 gifts. Dare you accept them? So I'm going to use that poem to explore what kind of world we're trying to create in Triratna. So the first gift is a lotus flower. In a little commentary on the poem, Bhante said, well, it could have been a rose being a very, if you like, English flower. But of course, the lotus is a very traditional Buddhist symbol. A couple of months ago, I was in Kew Gardens. You've heard about, I'm quite keen on plants. I was really delighted to see a lotus in full bloom, particularly because the last couple of times I'd been, the lotuses had either been, just in bud but not open, or had gone over. They don't stay open very long. And there's something really, if you've ever seen a lotus flower in bloom, there's something really, miraculous about it, because they come, if this is where my feet are, it's the level of the water, they come up about this high, they come right out of the water to produce this very beautiful bloom. Just a little botanical note. So they're different from, water lilies, which is our natural equivalent, at least in this country, water lilies tend to just flower on the surface of the water, or maybe just a few inches above it, whereas lotuses, they come right up high. So the symbol, the traditional symbol of the lotus in Buddhism is the idea that the lotus grows in the mud, which is a symbol for our unskillful mental states. And out of that grows this incredible flower, which is this beautiful bloom, which is a symbol for the enlightened mind. So in other words, this sort of growing out of the mud, and coming into flower is a symbol of spiritual development or spiritual unfolding. So when in the poem Bhante asks, "Do you understand?" we could say he's asking, do you understand that you are an individual who can grow and develop? In other words, are we convinced that we can change our minds and so change our world? If we're not convinced, well, we're not going to do very much in that way. We're not going to change our minds. So are we convinced of that? If you go to a Sri Ratna centre, pretty much anywhere in the world, Dynart has mentioned I've connections to various centres around the world, and I've been to a lot of centres over the years in different parts of the world. Pretty much anywhere you go, if you go to an introductory class, you will be taught the mindfulness of breathing and the metta bhavana. So in other words, you will be taught how to cultivate awareness, how to cultivate loving kindness. And if you do that, it will change how you experience the world. It will start you on a path of personal development, of spiritual development. It will start to produce a world that's perfumed by clarity and kindness. And when we practice loving kindness, when we practice metta with one another, then chances are out of that will blossom friendship. And in Sri Ratna we emphasise that very strongly. So that's very important, very valuable, very delightful to develop friendships, to create sangha. Bhante describes friendship as a soil out of which spiritual growth occurs. In other words, it kind of nourishes spiritual growth. And kindness, loving kindness, as the sunlight which stimulates growth. So in other words, one of the things that we could say in terms of what sort of world we're trying to create in Sri Ratna is we're trying to create a world in which metta, loving kindness, and friendship can flourish. Now that's a very big and challenging thing actually to do, although we can do it bit by bit. In a talk that Bhante gave in 1984, he gave a talk on Buddhism, world peace and nuclear war. And in that talk, he distinguished between nationalism and patriotism. And he defined nationalism as an exaggerated, passionate and fanatical devotion to one's national community at the expense of all others, whereas patriotism is simply the love of one's own country, which doesn't in itself exclude smaller or larger interests or loyalties, and, as he said, is not incompatible with peace. What he said about it is, this does not mean, this is patriotism, that in order to achieve peace we have to stop loving our own village or city, our own provinces, our own country or our own continent, but rather we have to love them because they're all part of the world. It means that we have to identify ourselves with humanity rather than any particular section of it, and love humanity as ourselves. We have to feel for the different national communities and the different ethnic and linguistic groups the same kind of love we feel for the different limbs of our own bodies. So what Bhante is saying here is that, we need to love others in the same way as we love different parts of our own body. That's the metaphor he's using. In other words, we need to see others who are different from us, whether that's difference in appearance, in race, or political beliefs, as being human, just in the way that we're human. I was recently talking to a Mitra friend who works in the Foreign Office, and he was saying that in a way one of the first things he tries to do, or is trying to do in a situation of conflict, is get each side to see the other side as human. It's kind of like a basic level, if you like. Because when we have a mind of ill will, in a way we're seeing people as less than human. Whereas when we're in a mind state of metta or of loving kindness, it's like we recognise each other as being human. So this is what the first gift is pointing to. The second gift is a golden net, which Bhante says is a vision of existence. So why do we need a vision of existence? Well, I think on its own, having a sense of personal development is insufficient. It can become overly subjective, even indulgent, or even a bit of a fantasy. Even practicing, when we try and practice metta, not metta in its real sense, but when we try and practice it, it can become a bit of a fantasy. I mean, I sometimes think, when I'm sitting in the comfort of my own room with my eyes closed, I can love just about anyone. That's rather different from having to actually interact with them face to face. It's much easier in the privacy of one's own psyche. But obviously, that's not enough. So we need something a bit more objective as well. We need something that we can come into relationship that's grounded in how things actually are, not in a fantasy or an idea of how things are. So we need a vision of existence. We need an understanding of the nature of reality. And the image that Bhante uses here is a net. So why a net? Well, first of all, the idea of a net immediately speaks to, if you've been practicing Buddhism for a while, it will immediately conjure to mind the idea of something called Indra's net. So Indra's net is a net where each node is a jewel, so it's a net of jewels, and each jewel is said to reflect each and every other jewel in the net. So it's an image of interconnection. All the jewels are connected with one another in the sense they reflect each other. So what you could think of this is, what it's pointing to is that you've got all these different parts, these different nodes of a net, but they make it a coherent whole. And this is the case with the Buddha's teaching. The Buddha's teaching is, if you like, a coherent whole, just as our own tradition. For any Buddhist tradition to be an actual tradition, it needs to make sense as a coherent whole. So the Triratna tradition is a coherent whole. And another aspect of a net is the fact that it's permeable. And of course this is, again, this is how things are. This is the nature of reality. Things interpenetrate. And so as a community, Triratna welcomes anyone who wants to practice with us, anyone who resonates with our tradition, with how we practice. There's not a barrier. It's not like, we close the door and sorry, we're now full, no more people, thank you very much. It's always open, it's always permeable. And of course, the permeability also points to being permeable, being open to suffering in the world. And if with the image of the lotus flower is about cultivating metta, we could say that in a way this vision of existence points to compassion, because when loving kindness comes into contact with suffering, if it's real loving kindness, it will just naturally transform into compassion. That is what compassion is. It's the response of loving kindness to suffering. And as we open to suffering, well, that will have a sort of tenderizing effect on our psyches, on our sensibility, on our ethical sensibility, on our sensitivity and sensibility to ourselves and others. So we may not have the skills or the opportunities like my Mitra friend to try and perhaps broker peace in the Middle East. But we can be open to the sufferings both in ourselves and in the people that we're actually in contact with around us, the people that we're in direct contact with. It's like we can't actually partition off suffering. I think we often try. We have all sorts of ways of trying to partition off suffering, whether that's by distracting ourselves, ignoring, or in other ways. But actually, we can't really do that. It doesn't finally work as a strategy. So we need to be able to respond to suffering, and that means we need compassion. We need loving kindness which will transform into compassion. So in the poem, Bhante says about this vision of existence, can you recognize it? So what I think, or one way that I think we could think about this is if you come to the Buddhist Center, you might learn to meditate, you might join a study group, you might learn about ethics, you might start to develop friends. But can you get the spirit behind it? The spirit that illuminates, if you like, this. Can you grasp the flavour or the fragrance of this tradition? The fragrance, you could say, of compassion. So in other words, they're sort of like can you get what's, when I'm talking about compassion, when you're trying to practice compassion, can you get the real, 24 karat gold, as opposed to what we sometimes refer to as the near enemies of either sentimentality or pity, which compassion can easily shade off into. Can you get what's really, the spirit behind it? It's often said that the Dharma is caught rather than taught. It's like, can you catch the spirit? It was reminding me a bit of those things that I only today found out what they're called, which is an autostereogram. So autostereograms are those, I don't know if they used to be popular about 10 years ago or so, these sort of like patterns, and then you stare at them, and if you can stare at them the right way, then something pops out in like a 3D form. There's a few nods from there. One or two of you will recognise those things. I could never do it myself, and I didn't have the knack. But anyway, it's a bit like that. It's like the 3D that pops out is like the spirit. So it's like you're trying to see behind or through all the different bits and pieces into the spirit that enlivens our tradition, or that enlivens the Dharma. Okay, so the third gift is a shepherd's round dance. So, if we're going to do a shepherd's round dance, you'll need other people. So, I think, in a way, the first thing that this is pointing to is spiritual community or sangha. So, when Bhante came to Britain, or whether when he came back to Britain in sort of 66, 67, he founded a spiritual community. So he founded the what was then Friends of the Western Buddhist Order in 67, as I mentioned, and the order in 68. So in founding an order, in founding a spiritual community, he was bringing together a community of people who were committed to personal development in line with this vision of existence, of the nature of existence. A spiritual community with the order at the heart. So the order being those who, to the best of their ability, are committed wholeheartedly, hopefully for life, to the Buddha Dharma Sangha in the context of this particular tradition. And then Bhante, and indeed we talk about friends, so friends being anyone who comes to the centre, comes to classes, is interested in Triratna, and then Mitra being a stage, if you like, between being a friend and an order member, a Mitra being someone who wants to formalise their connection, who identifies themselves as a Buddhist and wants to practice in this tradition. And I believe we'll see a few people committing in that way later this evening. So this is what Bhante did, is he created this spiritual community based essentially on commitment to the Buddha Dharma Sangha. He didn't, you don't become an order member or a mitra by paying a subscription. Bhante was very keen that it was clear on that we were clear on that. So although, of course we need money for running centre and activities and so on, so we ask for dana, it's very important we can try and contribute in that way. It's not the basis for becoming either a mitra or an order member. As I said, Bhante was very keen on this principle. I mean, he gave an example of in 1952, when he was still in India, he came across this gentleman who was rather smartly clad in a satin saffron suit, if you can get your head around that. And he was establishing a Buddhist order. And it had 4 classes of membership. You could join as a stream entrant, a once returner, a non-returner, or an arahant. And depending which level you came at, you had to pay more. So to enter to the top level as an arahant was 500 rupees, which I imagine at that time was quite a lot of money. I don't know, I haven't done my calculations on that. But, that idea that in a way that you could join an organisation by paying money, of course it makes sense in some situations. I was thinking it makes sense in terms of membership of the National Theatre, for example, where, you can become a member, a patron, a premium member, a benefactor, and I think there's an Olivier something or other for your top, where you pay different amounts and you get different benefits. But the important thing is that a spiritual community is based on spiritual commitment. It's not based on how much you pay. So the Shepherd's Round Dance is pointing to the importance of a spiritual community. Bhante in his commentary on the talk also makes the point of course, the thing about Shepherd's Round Dance is it's enjoyable, apparently. As I've discovered, not everybody likes dancing. I quite like dancing, but not everybody quite likes dancing. But anyway, I think the idea is it's enjoyable. So in other words, the spiritual life should be enjoyable. Being with each other in the Sangha should be enjoyable. Certainly, I mean, I feel very fortunate. I live with 9 other guys upstairs, and I really enjoy living in that way. And I remember in the first lockdown we had in 2020 was just great. I just so enjoyed just hanging out and spending more time with the guys. I travel quite a lot, so in a way, probably for me, it was like, oh, phew, I don't have to go anywhere. I can just be in London with my friends, living together. It's just brilliant. And one of the really nice things I like living with friends, amongst many, is that, when we have our birthdays, we, celebrate with a nice meal and so on, but we also do something called rejoicing in merits, which is where we take turns to say what we appreciate about the person in terms of their qualities. And I must have talked to my niece about this, because when this is my oldest niece, when she got or just before she got married, she said to me, "So when we're having the wedding, would you do that thing where you say nice things about people?" So I had the pleasure of rejoicing in the merits of my niece and her husband, which was a very nice thing to do. So if we participate in the Sangha in this way, we get to know each other, get to appreciate each other's qualities, then loving kindness will quite naturally develop into what we call mudita, or sympathetic joy. So it's a delight in other people, in other people's qualities. So we can think of this, this shepherd's round dance as an image for that kind of sympathetic joy, that kind of joy and enjoyment. But I also think the round, it's a round dance. It implies cooperation. You know, to dance with other people. If we're not just doing the whatever. That's me doing popular dancing from the 1980s, where you effectively have no real relationship to anybody around you. If you're doing something like a round dance, then you have to cooperate. And I think what this means is that it implies a real engagement with one another. And by that, I mean, it's not about a sort of rolling over and being passive, sort of doing a people-pleasing out of insecurity or fear, but rather, as an individual, coming into a real relationship with other people as individuals. So Bhante asks in this thing, he says, "Do your feet know how to dance?" So it's interesting, it's the feet, it's not do you know how to dance, it's do your feet know how to dance. So in a way, it sort of seems to me it's implying, it's that moment in dance when you're not sort of thinking about it, it's not having to think, oh, now I do my right foot there, and then the next foot there, and then whatever it is. It's just become, in other words, it becomes intuitive or spontaneous. So he's pointing to a quality, I think, of cooperation that is spontaneous and intuitive. And the example I was thinking of for this, where just one example where I see this in operation is being on the team of the winter retreat. So when we hold, we have a big, as I'm sure many of you know, a big introductory retreat in Adhisthana over the Christmas and New Year. And I've been on the team for that a number of times. And in fact, I'm doing it this year again with Surya Gupta and Dayanata. Oh, that's good, isn't it? One of the things I really love about the team is that when it works, and it usually does, occasionally some difficulties, but usually when it works, there's a real lovely quality of people not just sort of trade union sticking to this is my job, I'm doing the washing up and I will do nothing else, but just doing their own job, but also just helping out wherever anything is needed. And also, when we have a little sort of check-in in the evenings to see how we're going, and as the retreat goes on, it's just more and more full of rejoicing in merits. It's just delightful. It's just, we put on the retreat for other people, but actually I think the people who get the most from it are the team. There's something really wonderful about doing those retreats. So yes, I think this round dance is pointing to this idea of just spontaneous cooperation with one another to within the spiritual community. So the fourth one is a garden planted in the wilderness. So a garden, well, certainly for me, is something very, very evocative, hopefully for you too. I was reminded of some Chinese proverbs, so 2 Chinese proverbs. The first one is, "Life begins the day you start a garden." And so I hope you've started your lives. And then the second one is, if you want to be happy for an hour, get drunk. If you want to be happy for a day, get married. Now, some versions do say a year rather than a day, so maybe it depends on the quality of your marriage. But then it says, if you want to be happy for life, plant a garden. So, yeah, as I said, for me, there's something very evocative about gardens. The word paradise comes from an ancient Indian word meaning Iranian word meaning a walled garden. And there's something very wonderful about walled gardens. You see them in I don't know if you ever looked at paintings of Annunciation. So Annunciation is when the angel comes down to tell the Virgin Mary that she's going to be the father. It's very gender diverse. She's going to become the mother of Jesus. But often what you see in those paintings is the Virgin sort of sitting reading a book, in a sort of almost like a little sort of edge of the house or outhouse or something like that. But then there's a walled garden, and sometimes you see the angel has landed in the walled garden, and she's kind of like in the patio. So again, sort of very frequently used and evocative image. So I think for me the thing about a garden is, in a way, what's for one thing that's been pointed to here is we're trying to create something beautiful. So what we're trying to do in True Ratna is trying to create a beautiful world. It's not just any old world, we're trying to create a beautiful world. But I think also the garden points to it being something substantial. So what I mean by this is, it's not just enough to have a spiritual community. You know, it's very important. We need to have a spiritual community. But we also need concrete manifestations in the world, conditions basically that enable us to practice. Without that, it's very hard to be a spiritual community. So that's why we have things like centres, communities, businesses, retreat centres. And I've been really delighted that we've just opened the Mandala Cafe next door. I think that's just so important. That's an example of the sort of manifestation in the world. Partly because, it's a great place. It gives us a place as a Sangha to come and meet. To come and have dinner shortly. To meet, whether it's over coffee or a meal. But also, for those who want to, it's also an opportunity to have a place where you can work with other Buddhists who are trying to do the same thing as you, working on the same principles. So it has a twofold benefit for the community, for the spiritual community. So it's a garden that's planted in the wilderness. So what's the wilderness? So we can think of the ordinary life or samsara as being the wilderness. Particularly if you think of when we relate to each other as, in a way, less than human, as objects, as things that we, move around or try and manage. We could think of that as being samsara. So there's the external world, but there's also the internal world. So in a sutta called the Chatukila Sutta, the Buddha talks about 5 wildernesses of the heart. So again, very evocative term, 5 wildernesses of the heart. So the first 4 are to do with being doubtful, being uncertain, being unconfident about, firstly, the Buddha, secondly, the Dharma, the truth or the teachings, thirdly, the Sangha or spiritual community, and fourthly, the training. So in other words, the spiritual training, like meditation and study and so on. So when it talks about being doubtful in this way, it's not about saying, don't ask questions, don't check things out. It's about a quality of wavering, of sort of sitting on the fence, of not committing, in a way a painful not committing. Vince Lombardi, the US football coach, which anyone who knows me will be very surprised that I'm quoting from him, but anyway, he says, most people fail not because of lack of desire, but because of lack of commitment. So I found that quite interesting. So it's like when we don't commit, when we just keep our options open, beyond a certain point, obviously there's a period for that when we're reflecting and thinking on that, but beyond a certain point, that becomes a rather painful, unpleasant state, which is a wilderness of the heart, according to the Buddha. And then the fifth wilderness of the heart is being angry and displeased with our companions in the holy life, being resentful of them and callous towards them. So in other words, it's sort of an attitude of fault-finding with the people that we're trying to practice the Dharma with. Samsara, or ordinary life, is sometimes described as the tendency to find fault with things. So it's a tendency that we're well worth watching out for, because it's so easy to fall into. If I just think back to my working days, what did we, what was the default conversation, when we were together? And it was usually either where we were going on holiday, what foods we liked, or complaining about usually the management. So yes, just that, it's very easy to fall into that sort of, in a way, fault-finding sort of tendency. But again, according to the Buddha, it's a wilderness of the heart. So, in the poem, Bhante says, with regard to this, could you work there? So I think we can take that both in a literal sense. Could you work, volunteer in the Mandala Cafe, for example? Nods from Satchimanus. Could you support a class team, be on a retreat team? But also, can you commit? Can you commit and go beyond being this painful state, mind state of doubt? And what it also points to is that if we engage with a spiritual community, things won't always be according to our liking. So this question, could you work there? Could you engage with a spiritual community, is, can you go beyond your preferences? Can you go beyond your likes and dislikes for a greater goal, for a greater good? And in this sense, if we cultivate metta and come into relationship with some things are, the way we like them to be, but some things aren't, it helps us to cultivate a quality of equanimity. And equanimity is a very profound and important quality to cultivate in the spiritual life. So the final part of the poem is, it's gifts and a challenge. So the final two lines are, I come to you with 4 gifts. Dare you accept them? So it's a challenge. The Dharma life is a challenge, because if you're going to practice it, means you'll need to change your life. And the Dharma will upset things. So be warned, that's a little small print. We keep it very small on our introduction to meditation courses. In the small print, this will change your life and that will upset things. and there's these gifts. There's these 4 gifts which are freely bestowed and, which we can benefit from. We can benefit from what we're given. And I was thinking, in a way, there's partly we can benefit, partly it's just practical. We benefit by the fact that here we have the London Buddhist Centre. I benefit by the fact that here is the London Buddhist Centre. The London Buddhist Centre was inspired by the vision of Bhante and the lot of hard work. So again, before my time, a lot of people worked for more than 3 years to convert what was a burnt-out fire station into the Pure Land of the London Buddhist Centre. I say Pure Land because originally the whole project was called Sukhavati, which is the Pure Land of Amitabha. In other words, a land that is ideal for practicing the Dharma. So, that's been bestowed to us. I mean, obviously we have to contribute to keep it going, but that's what we've been given. But it also, we've been benefiting from a whole lineage. It's lovely to see here, you've got Bhante here with all his teachers. So we've received all these teachings and practices from Bhante, who in turn has received teaching and practicing from his teachers, and his main teachers are all here. And his teachers from their teachers, going all the way back to the Buddha. So in other words, we're connected, coming here, practicing today, we're connected to a whole lineage that goes back through Bhante, through his teachers, right back to the Buddha. So if we're alive to that, if we practice metta in the real sense of the word, of metta, of loving kindness, it will lead to, being aware of this will lead to a sense of devotion, of gratitude, of reverence, of confidence, confidence being the antidote to this sort of painful doubting, a whole family of positive, skillful emotions. And if we're open to, recognizing what in a way we have received, we are receiving, it's like we're open to a whole channel of blessings. The Sanskrit word for this is called adhisthana, blessings. It's like just being here, being able to practice together from the lineage going back through Bhante to the Buddha is like being open to a whole field of blessings. So, and actually, if we really pay attention, we can tune into that sense of receiving the blessings of the lineage. So, although the Buddha disappeared 2,500 years ago, although Bhante is dead, he died 5 years ago, the effects of their lives continue to resonate. We're still receiving the gifts from Bhante that he outlined in this poem 50 years ago. The blessings of the tradition come down to us. Reminded me of a little poem by Anzan Hoshin, which goes like this. Smoke waved from an incense stick 1,000 years ago brings tears to the eye. So I started this talk by, or said that what I was trying to do in this talk was try and understand, try and explore what sort of world we're trying to create in Triratna. And I think if we wish to, if we dare to accept the gifts that Bhante has offered, it's possible to create a world that's infused by loving kindness, by compassion, by equanimity, by devotion, by reverence, It's possible to create a world of beauty, what I would even call it a sacred world. For me, the most meaningful possible world. And that all starts with, although it doesn't finish there, but it starts with what we do with our mind. As the poet John Milton said, the mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. So hopefully what we want to do is create a heaven of hell. So I'm just going to finish with the poem again. 4 gifts. I come to you with 4 gifts. The first gift is a lotus flower. Do you understand? My second gift is a golden net. Can you recognize it? My third gift is a shepherd's round dance. Do your feet know how to dance? My fourth gift is a garden planted in the wilderness. Could you work there? I come to you with 4 gifts. Dare you accept them?
Wow, so thank you very much, Paramabandhu. I really felt like very, very inspired by that talk, particularly reminding, well, me personally, that importance of working on my own mind and then, in a way, the beauty that can create in the world. And it's very, very inspiring. I thought actually your talk was very beautiful in itself, and you really embodied the qualities you were talking about. So yeah, so thank you very, very much. I think it was very, very, very inspiring talk. So let's give Paramabandhu. Thank you. Good. Yes. So as Paramabandhu was saying, you can hear more from Paramabandhu because often he's in different countries and around the world. So if you want to get another taste of him, do come on the winter retreat if you can, Adhisthana, to hear some more talks from Paramabandhu, and myself and Sri Gupta will also be leading it there. So yeah, that's a really good tip there if you want to hear more from Paramabandhu. Otherwise, what we'll do, so we'll. In about 15 minutes, we'll open the doors to the Mandala Cafe for dinner, so you're welcome to come. That's by donation. And then the Mitra ceremonies are at 7 o'clock. So thanks very much. See you later. That's great. Brilliant. I thought it was really, really clear. And you can really follow it. It's like it's a bit of an inspiring person. Yeah, it's really, really good actually. Really like Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, but just very relatable. Thank you.